and this might shock you a bit, but it's the development on women and girls, which I think has become more of a buzz tweet.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the MentorZ podcast. I'm your host, Ava Wettrick. Here on this show, we talk to luminaries from around the world to discuss their journey towards success and what wisdom they have to offer the younger generation. Each episode, we have on a new guest, a new story, and a new path towards personal success. I hope you're ready, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MentorZ. Today, we have on Jay'len Boone. Jay'len is an American youth activist and currently serves as the United States Youth Observer for the United Nations. He is currently a senior at the University of Texas in San Antonio and double majoring in Global Affairs and Sociology. Jay'len is passionate about empowering young people to take the lead in solving global issues. He is the founder and executive director of Sustainable Youth in Action, a nonprofit organization that trains and equips students with the tools that they need to take their ideas and turn them into projects and even businesses. He is a Global Citizen Curtis Scholar, Cultural Vistas Fellow, and winner of the 2016 Gates Millennium Scholarship. His desire to combat social issues, such as extreme poverty and climate change, has taken him across the globe, working on the ground with communities in Hong Kong, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Japan. One of his primary goals is to increase local action and involvement in the Sustainable Development Goals. It is his belief that community activists and young changemakers at the local level will play a pivotal role in determining whether the SDGs will succeed or not. Without further ado, Jay'len Boone. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MentorZ. Today we have on Jay'len Boone. Jay'len, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I am so excited. Just because of our conversation beforehand, I'm really excited. I asked this question to all of my guests. What is your origin story? Where did you start? And how did you get to where you are today? And you can go back as far as you'd like.
Yeah. So, my origin story starts in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where I was born and raised. It's a township just outside Detroit. And one thing I really loved about the township I grew up in is this, how much they taught me about community. And, when a lot of people think about like Detroit or that part of Michigan I stay in, you usually hear buzzwords like violence or gangs or murder, which can all be true, but I believe it's true everywhere you go. And in Detroit, it's more so community. It's always been that word that shouts out. A community that, looks out for one another. Like I know my mom could trust me to be outside without, getting caught up or getting, in trouble because she could trust that our neighbors would discipline me if I did. So it was just a very, circular ecosystem, if you will. And so from there, I went on to school at McBride and Belleville, which I'm excited to be going back to doing a first ever Youth Observer homecoming tour. So I'll be going back to Michigan and visiting some of those spots that really molded me and made me who I am. And in 2017, or 16, we moved from Michigan to Texas. I know if my mom watches this, she'll be like, no, it was August something. I don't remember that much. And so we moved to Texas, and I was still in high school. And it was really cool because like I never been down south. And so like while it was cool, it was still a huge culture shock. Everything was so much more bigger. People were friendlier. For sure, which was kind of weird because I was just used to just jabs and directness. And yeah, like I ended up graduating from Cypress Springs High School and going on to UTSA, where I'm now a senior, studying global affairs and in sociology. And so, yeah, that's most of where like I've been on the timeline. And I'm sure we'll get into like specifics and whatnot.
Absolutely. I am really, really curious as to how you got involved in the UN because it's a big, big entity, and navigating those waters and figuring out how to get where. I'm really curious as to how you started your journey in that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I So when I came in my freshman year of college, I had this mentor who's amazing. Her name is Dr. Eisenberg, and I think someone just told me, my friend Matthew Trevino told her about me, and I approached her, um, and she's like, "So, you're the one that everyone's talking about." And I'm like, "Okay, sure." But essentially, it was like she doesn't know this, but it sort of felt like. Have you ever seen The Incredibles?
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
like, okay, and there's like Edna.
Yes.
She's got like she's got the rolly chair with the bob.
Oh, my goodness.
That is exactly how I pictured Dr. Eisenberg, and I've never told her that, but like literally, she is that. She's the type that's very direct, but she gets you right. And so she sat there and she's like, "Tell me your story." And I remember telling her things, and she's like, "Oh yeah, mm-hmm, okay." And she's like, "You should do this, that, this, and that." I'm like, "Wow, you're like on it." And it wasn't like she had told me maybe you could do these things, but she said you're going to do these things. And one of those things was the Youth Observer. And I never really like, I'd always been a local activist. Like, I've always loved my community. I've done things with churches, local action groups, you name it. And I'd never really been concerned with a global sort of work or title. And she told me about the Youth Observer program. And at that time there was only, was it 3 years ago? It was probably like only 4 or 5 of them so far. And I remember looking at the requirements and all the like things and seeing what I have to do. And I was like, nope, not ready. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll revisit it sometime my senior year or something. But it wasn't really on my radar. And so, before I left this past summer, I was working in Saudi Arabia. And, I had saw an email from her. She's like, "It's open. You never know." And I was like, okay, let me just throw my name in the ring. And yeah, after a series of tough marker points for the interviews and application, I ended up being the 8th U.S. Youth Observer. So here we are now, and it's been pretty sweet.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad that you had a mentor like Dr. Eisenberg to
Mm-hmm.
help you out and to support you that way. And I love the comparison of Edna. The great
Oh
mental
yeah.
picture in my brain. Absolutely. And, in your time as UN Youth Observer, what are some of the most like pressing issues that are facing youth globally or youth in America that we just might not know about? Because there are some of the big ones like climate change, which is really abundant and present, but
Mm-hmm.
what are some other deeply pressing issues that we might not have seen yet?
Yeah, no, and every what I love about the Youth Observer program is, we work in 1 year, 10 years, so from August to August, and each of us is specifically different. We work on a plethora of issues. Me being, if you've seen anything on me, climate change, of course, and in my predecessor, working largely with hunger. And then before him, women and girls, and so we've all had our SDGs. We've sort of, tackled and try to work more towards. But honestly, I think one of the things that's going, unlooked, and one of the pressing issues, and this might shock you a bit, but it's the development on women and girls, which I think has become more of a buzz tweet than it has an actual, you know, agenda, like, an actual issue that we're looking to, tackle. And why I say that is because you see a lot of attention from celebrities and things like that talking about this is what young women deserve. This is why there's still not equal pay. There's still not even access to education in, developing countries. And it's like, okay, but there was a declaration, Beijing plus 25, that was made years ago, and there still hasn't been any real change. There's only been lots of social sort of awareness. And I believe that this is the year of the anniversary of the Beijing plus 25 conference, women and girls. And I believe this year we'll actually see, in this decade, we'll see some actual changes happen in regard to women's rights, and young girls gathering education and health products in developing countries, because when you empower women and girls, you can empower a nation. That's not just like a common phrase, but it's an actual economical and feasible thing. Like, they've looked at it, and you see that the care that a mother gives is can't be compared to one that a man gives. And I recognize that as a male, in this noticing the work of my mom and the role she played in my education development, and so I want to see more of that happening this next year, next decade. But yeah, that's one of those issues that I believe that we talk a lot about, but there's actually not a lot happening on.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting that you bring that up, because again, in the U.S., it's, you see it everywhere. Women should deserve these equal rights. Everything should be at a certain stance. But like you said, and like you're expressing right now, there's a lot going on the other side of the world. There's a lot going on in developing countries, and you are completely right. And again, it is a cliche, but you are helping 50% of a population in a nation. That has to be some benefit. I've noticed that as well, in terms of, you don't want to say it's all talk, but again, it becomes really buzz phrasey and great to do, but there's not been a lot of action behind it. So I'm really excited that you see some hope for post Beijing 25. Hopefully that all of the women's development, especially around the world, will become a lot more stable, a lot more steady, and we'll see growth and progression. Actually, how, this is a really curious question. When it comes to activism, people get kind of upset because they're like, oh, you're just talking, it's all talk, it's all talk. But how do you translate that activism and just talking, quote unquote, to that action and that push for real change? Because we've been seeing it a lot with youth, really speaking up and showing their voice, but a lot of people think that nothing's happening because of it, when there really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is the token question. And it is the question that, if my term as youth observer was a research project, my research question would be that. How do we take talk and translate it into action? And I will say, just a quick side note and shameless plug for those wanting to get to work on what's happening on this new agenda of women's rights and young girls in developing countries. There's a wonderful organization under the United Nations Foundation called Girl Up, and I believe they're spearheading a lot that we'll see in this next decade. So that's a group that is learning to take what they talk about and turn it into action, be it through campaigns, petitions, lobbying efforts. All those things actually matter, as played out as they seem. It does matter when you can email or write your member of Congress. It does matter when you can show up and be present at the UN meetings that you can have access to. It does matter. But I would say, more than all of those things, it matters about what you're doing locally. And that's the work that I've gotten my hands into over the past 6 years now, has been helping students develop projects that impact their local communities. And I do that through a nonprofit I started about 2 years ago called Sustainable Youth in Action. And basically, it's easy what we do. We take students who have the talk, right? Who have the ideas, and we consult with them. We provide them tools, methods of, feasibility, how to create longevity, how to make sure it's a sustainable business or project, We provide funding at some ends, to make sure that they have enough to be able to push the project out. And I think the most valued thing is we provide one-on-one mentorship, student to student, experienced to non-experienced. And I think this is the most beautiful thing, because why do we need to call on an event planner when we can just use each other? And so what we're seeing is this sort of synergy that's created between students collaborating on impacting their communities, not just impacting, not just working together to get an A on an assignment, right? Which is the method of colleges today. If I were to have created a college, and this is completely just Jaylen's world, my college would be completely run by, how students are taking the concepts they learn and applying them. Because honestly, you're going to go through so many classes in college, but you won't ever remember what you learned, but you'll remember those classes where you've applied what you've learned. And so on the, back to your question on how do we take it from, this talking to action, multiple ways you can do that. And some of the ways our nonprofit does that is through mentoring, counseling, consulting, but largely empowering students to take those ideas, put them through this machine of hard work. You've probably heard of Lean Canvas, knowing your dad, and putting them through all these mechanisms to make sure it comes out as something that can last. And I believe that, SYA will be launching something very special in April, but it'll be able to, maximize the impact of what we're trying to do here in San Antonio to the entire United States. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, when you engage in your community and you make it a beautiful scene, right? It can transition to the most awesome things, because once San Antonio starts doing it, maybe Austin will do it, maybe Houston will pick it up, and now you have a whole state doing one thing, and they're rocking out, they're killing it, and then that can transition into other cities, other states, and then the whole country could be on it. It's a beautiful progression. And speaking of those students speaking up and making change, how can young people get involved and get connected to the UN? I think it's kind of seen as like this not scary entity, but it looks so large that you don't know how to interject yourself.
Yeah. No, I mean, even in my role now, it still feels a bit large to me. There's a lot of high level political forum meetings. There's a lot of, closed off General Assembly meetings, that quite frankly, we don't have access to unless it's televised or recorded. But where we do have an access point is through our Youth Envoy's office. And so the UN Youth Envoy is basically like a, I guess, UN observer, but for the entire world. And she does more than just observe. She actually sits with Secretary General, and but she's like our champion that sits up there at all the high level meetings. And she has a lot of great initiatives under her belt and lots of great things that she's trying to pull out. And she wants youth to get involved, we had in September the UN Youth Climate Summit, which was the first of its kind. We gathered over 140 youth observers from 140 countries. So that was awesome. And we all came together to discuss this pressing matter of, climate action and climate change. So that was unique. But she also has a bunch of different other initiatives. Like we have our EcoSoc Youth Forum. But then there are advocates of the UN, which I believe that Americans can play the hugest part in. Just to be transparent with you, everyone, it's not a mystery to find out how, our government thinks currently about the UN. And so that may be a little bit discouraging at times, but there are still organizations working to promote the work of the UN, which I'm proud to stand and represent at UNA USA, who's the advocacy arm of the UN here in America. And students get involved with them through a number of different ways, from, being a part of a UNA USA chapter, coming out to, we even have students from the chapters actually come to the UN in September to participate in the UNA USA delegation, which is awesome. We also have a Global Entrepreneurship Summit, which is happening now in the end of March, and that's hosted in the UN. But there's all these different opportunities for students to come and experience both the work of the UN, advocating for it on their own ring in spite of the government differences, and just a collective effort to really draw in what it means to have a United Nations. Now, the entity itself at the UN offers a lot of different things as well. You've got internships, which I know I was talking to the youth envoy about. It's kind of difficult because they aren't paid, and it's you relocating to New York City. And for internationals, that might seem like a maybe feasible thing because they have sponsorship from their country, but we don't. So if you're coming from, say, Indiana to try to intern at the UN, you've got to take care of a number of things. But those are things that they're working on, and I know is on their radar. But other than that, they have volunteer programs. The list honestly goes on, and there's lots that you can find when you explore the UN site, but don't just stop there. There's also partner, like there's UNESCO, there's UNDP, UNEP. They all have separate programs, ways you can get involved, intern, volunteer. So I check out some of those links.
I'm so glad that Jay'len was able to give some great direction in terms of how youth can get involved in the UN, and that is definitely something to ponder on until part 2 of this interview, which comes out tomorrow. Be sure to stay tuned for more global wellness advice from Jay'len, the process he took to becoming the UN Youth Observer, and the major impact that entrepreneurship is having on the local and global community.